Hey guys, welcome to the How They Did It podcast. We're here with Cliff Wilson. So I actually learned about Cliff from one other of our old guests, Steve Hall, who started working with them. And I saw Steve's transformation. I saw how lean he looked for his last. I started looking into Cliff. I started seeing everything that he's doing, and I'm like, this guy is maybe one of the best coaches I've ever seen on getting people that shredded. Well, one, Steve's already an amazing athlete even beforehand, but seeing what you were able to do with someone so advanced as a fan of bodybuilding, not a bodybuilder myself, just a fan, but as a trainer for a long time, I was very aspirational to see you do that and see you work with someone like Steve. I was like, let me see if he'll come on the podcast. So we're very lucky to have you. Thank you for being on.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And I need to give Steve a thanks for mentioning me to you.
No, and I watched after I heard that you were working with Steve. I started looking up your interviews. I started seeing your talk. I've seen your talk with Steve too. I think your most recent podcast, it's fantastic. You guys should definitely go check it out if you're really into the deep science of it. I think it's fantastic to watch. We're gonna be a little less deep into the bodybuilding. I'm going to take you a little bit outside of that, and because so the people that I help mostly are like general population people. There are some athletes I work with as well that, especially on my online clients that are like professional fighters. I want to get your opinion on that because I've been helping people cut weight for many, many years. I also struggled with weight loss and getting lean in my life. I was an obese teen. We have a whole bunch to cover, and I'm super excited to cover it with you.
Yeah, yeah, and that would definitely works because it's like I think sometimes people get this impression because I mostly work with bodybuilders, but they get this impression that it's just two different things, but really it's the same thing. It's still the human body. It's just the degree to which you take it to.
Yeah, and actually, that's actually something I would like to touch on here, just to right off the bat. It's something I was thinking about. You talked about it a little bit with Steve, where you're talking about how some people are genetically maybe predispositioned to get leaner than other people. Like there's almost like a set point of how lean you can get. And I've realized this with even myself and a lot of my clients that especially ones that were obese in the past, it seems like the ability to get extremely lean is much more difficult. And yeah, so maybe you could touch on that in a little more detail.
Yeah, yeah, you are absolutely right. It's kind of like a and somebody that was obese. I don't think a lot of people realize that kind of what I talked about with Steve is that for the most part, by the time we reach adulthood, the number of body fat cells we have is set. You're not going to lose those body fat cells, and you can gain body fat cells in cases of extreme weight gain. So you can gain them, but then once they're there, they don't really go away. And so the problem is though, it's like once they fill out and you have these body fat cells there, so somebody that has been obese, they have this genetic predisposition. They probably have more total body fat cells than somebody that just naturally walks around with a slight six pack all the time. We all know those type of people. We all hate them.
Hate that.
It's but they just have that genetic gift. And so the problem is, as I was saying with Steve, is that our body reads how full our fat cells are. You know, when we get very lean, they shrink, and our body reads that they are empty, and it sends signals to eat. It sends signals to slow down metabolic rate. It sends signals to make you tired, craving, poor sleep, low libido, all these things. So somebody that is predispositioned for obesity, they'll have more body fat cells. And so they're going to experience all of these things at a much higher body weight and a much higher body fat. So it's not like, sometimes people will say things like obesity is a choice. It is driven through action, but those actions are also driven through biological mechanisms pushing you to that point. So what I experience, just sometimes I think of things in terms of, because I work with a lot of bodybuilders, is how many pounds over show weight they are. So if somebody's show weight is 175 pounds, just as an example, um, you know, some people start to experience really bad dieting side effects, all the things I just named, at like 15 pounds over show weight, which is usually pretty lean. And then some people experience that at 30 pounds over show weight. And so it's like the two things aren't equal, if that makes sense. Even though one person is 30 pounds over show weight, but they've been predispositioned towards being heavier most of their life, they're going to experience everything that I just mentioned much sooner and much heavier than most people.
I actually have a question here, and I'm going to derive a little bit from personal experience. When I was fighting through most of my career, So I started at 16 years old. I was 265 pounds at about 5'6", so I was extremely obese. I decided I want to be a professional fighter, kind of a crazy path. I decided I start training for fighting. And I get to America. I actually moved to America from Athens, Greece. I'm trying to become a fighter. And I finally get to coach. I lost like a good amount of weight early on. Probably lost like 30 kilos around there for my first big dieting attempt. And then I thought like, oh, I'm pretty good. I'm gonna fight maybe like 185 pounds or something. And my coach was like, yeah, you gotta fight like 145. And I was like, oh my god,
Yeah.
like what? Like what do you mean? Like that was insane. And so I actually built a bit of an eating disorder due to this. Like I already had a predisposition for binge eating because of how obese I was, but I built kind of an eating disorder where I was terrified. I would basically starve myself for long periods of time because I was so worried I would never make the weight. And then I would blow up and overeat. That kind of cycle continued throughout my career. And because of that, putting on muscle actually was really hard for me because as soon as I was done fighting, I was done with my whatever I made my weight and I won the fight or lost the fight. I would then normally binge and blow back up, wouldn't add that much muscle mass, or not nearly as much as I should have as an athlete. And then I would then go back into my hardcore training cycle, which was a pretty hard diet. I would be lifting mostly during those calorie deficits and heavy training deficits. And I basically, my weight cuts were always so hard. And my teammates were more muscular. A lot of them were collegiate athletes. I wasn't. A lot of them were more athletic than me generally, and they would be we'd be like 7 weeks out from the fight, and they would be like, oh, happy go lucky. They would go to the bar to watch the UFC with everybody. And I would go to the bar. I'd be like sipping on Diet Coke and like, they're like, yeah, whatever. They'd have like a bite of cheesecake. No one was panicking. Everyone was like, and we were both 20, 30 pounds away from our weight. It was like, wasn't as if I was much, but they did not feel any of like the hunger signal. I felt like I was starving already. And by the time I
Yeah.
got there, it was like white knuckle. I just could not wait to jump on that scale so I could finally be over with this torture of hell. And to make this long story short, I retired after I lost in the UFC. I got cut. One of the reasons that I had such a horrible loss was a bad weight cut, but we can get into that later. But anyway, I came back and I started lifting weights after I retired. I really got into weightlifting. I started getting into bodybuilding, not as to be a bodybuilder, but I was training people. I saw a lot of my clients, one that did martial arts, also wanted fitness. So I started studying to become a personal trainer and I started developing better habits, built a solid foundation of muscle. And then I took another fight like 2 years later. And I was maybe like, I probably put on like 20 pounds of muscle at that point. I was lighter than I was, and I did the weight cut. And I remember a week before the weight cut, I was snacking on nuts. And my fighter, one of my fighters who was fighting on the same card, was terrified to eat. And I was like, oh man, it switched. And I was like, I'm comfortable. You're not comfortable, and I have more muscle mass than you. So do you think that adding on a certain amount of muscle mass helps with that feeling over time or those cravings and whatnot?
Yeah, it does. I think what you explained there is a couple of things were probably at play. One, the increased muscle mass. When you add muscle mass, your body just becomes predispositioned towards better nutrient partitioning. A lot more of your nutrients are going to get shuttled towards the muscle mass and away from the fat. And so right there, that you already had that going for you. It also sounds like you got yourself out of that cycle you were in, binging and cutting and binging and cutting. And I see this all the time. I see it with fighters because I do know some fighters. I see it with fighters. I see it with bodybuilders where it's just cut, binge, and it's this bad cycle. And so actually that's where you get in this spot where I usually recommend, I would say these extreme cuts, whether it be for fighting or bodybuilding or whatever, even if you do it right, even if you do everything right, it's still extreme. It's like everything physically and psychologically, the body just has like this pendulum. If you push it one way, it's definitely going to swing back the other way to a degree. And so even if somebody isn't predisposed to having an eating disorder, I always sometimes jokingly say that like bodybuilding is like eating disorder simulation because nobody's balanced when they're that lean. Like you just can't be. And you even have like, even if you're not predisposed towards body dysmorphia, you definitely feel it because even, when you get super shredded for a bodybuilding show, I mean, you're just like, paper thin skin. And then you gain back 5 pounds and you're still, by all objective measures, shredded. You've just gained
Yeah.
5 pounds. But you'll look at yourself in the mirror and think, oh, I look like crap right now. And you're like, wait a minute. No, I don't look like crap. It's where you're coming from that's the problem. So it sounds like one of the best things you did also was get yourself out of that cycle. You had a few years where it sounds like you were in a fed state. And so it was able, and this is where it's like separate you can't separate the psychological from the physiological. Your physiological conditions act upon your psychological conditions, and then your psychological conditions act upon your physiological, and around it goes. And so I also think that it sounds like you didn't say this, but it sounds like your time stepping away from this cycle that you were in. Not only were you in a fed state, which is better physiologically, right? You had a couple of years of just not being hungry, or as hungry at least. And then you worked with other competitors, other athletes. And so I think it sounds like you didn't say this, but I would guess you had the ability to like step back and see the process. Do you know what I mean? From a larger scale. So you had a proper physiological condition, a couple of years of feeding, and a better psychological state of knowing more of what to expect. And it probably just came together in this much better system.
Yeah, I think both do. I think it's both 100%. It's actually funny that when I lost in the UFC, my first reaction was like, "Oh man, I made it to the big leagues and I messed up. Like I came here, I got called last minute, which, it's sure it was last minute, but that's part of the game. And I'm not ready. I'm actually in the worst shape of my life. I got called in the UFC. What a destructive thing. And it made me reflect on my mistakes. And then working with athletes, I was so terrified they would make the same mistakes I was that I would be like, you can't do this. This is what it is. You got to be consistent over the year. Come on. I try to teach them about calories, and I would try to be like, it's okay. You had a piece of cake. It's not the end of the world. You don't have to go and eat
Yeah.
30 cakes right now. Like, I was really trying to get people not to make the mistakes I was making.
Well, you mentioned, so what you just brought up is interesting because I have this big problem with bodybuilders too, and it's a problem with serious athletes in general, is that it sounds like a big problem with bodybuilders is that when they are so into something, like most athletes are, like they're into their sport. The problem can sometimes be where that is the only thing that constitutes their entire identity. Like they have nothing else, it's just this
Mhm.
whole thing is me. And the problem with this is like it is good for it to take up a lot of space in your life because it should if it's important to you. But the problem is if it's literally the only thing, when you mess up on your diet, or you have a bad training session, people who have other things that constitute who they are, whether it be, family, friendships, other interests, just other things that they can include as part of themselves. Okay, if you mess up on your diet, you've failed at what you're trying to do, right? You've failed. But somebody who this is all that they are, you haven't just failed, you are now a failure. And there's a big difference between I failed and I'm a failure. And so I oftentimes will tell my like bodybuilders, even when they're serious, especially the ones that are very serious, I'm like, you have to have more to yourself. And it sounds like also by this point you had like some successful training under your belt, some successful coaching. You had other things that constituted who you are. So like my guess is you have something slightly off of your diet. Yeah, you're not happy about it, but you're like, hey, let's get right back on track. You know what I mean? Because it's like you don't have to go in this cycle, this spiraling out of control cycle of I'm a failure. You know what I mean?
What a piece of shit I am. I can't believe I did that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think I'm curious how you handle this because I think there is a fine line for success with especially in sports at a high level, with kind of like an obsession for the sport and winning, like a hyper competitiveness, and being able to control when you do have failures and coming back and having that resilience and not being malleable to the situation, having some form of balance that doesn't let you break, not so you're not so rigid, you're a little bit more malleable and don't break at the first sign of problems. And how do you help your clients and athletes balance that?
One of the things is to point out examples of other athletes that they admire because, like, sometimes they get in this habit of just like observing these athletes from afar and they kind of put them on this pedestal. Frequent times I hear people reference, like, and this is me, by the way. I'm going to put this preference because I do this with my clients. I'm going to say like their way of stepping back and giving themselves a break from this whole identity is not always the right way. Different athletes have different ways, right? Some good, some bad, but I've over the years I've come to realize that they probably needed that to stay in a more balanced state. Like, people would they frequently bring up like Kobe Bryant, right? Kobe Bryant was like well known, pretty involved in like his kids' lives. You know what I mean? He would like do like help them with their coaching and with his daughters and stuff like that. And he had like some business ventures and he would mentor other players. You know what I mean? So like it wasn't just all on his own career. He was known for mentoring players while he was still in the league. Not the way I would suggest it, but even like Michael Jordan, he would compete in other things. Everything. He would compete in everything. He would compete in everything. Golf. He would, gamble. Just he would do all these things that were just, not 24 hours a day, basketball, basketball, basketball. And Tom Brady is another example too. He's kind of like had these other things outside these interests, business ventures outside of football. And so it's like, you look at every great athlete and they didn't just do their sport 24, like they had other interests that they used to get their mind away from the sport, that kind of other things that kind of constituted who they were as a person. And so it's like sometimes I'll even tell my clients where they don't want to take up other things, and I'll be like, like, are you saying that them doing that is wrong? Are you saying that they weren't as dedicated as you? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And to be honest with you, every time I have a client, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of winning bodybuilders over the years, and every time I have a client win a major pro show or a world championship. Oh my God, a major pro show or a world championship. I will ask them, where does bodybuilding rank in the importance in your life? And to be honest with you, usually it's not number one. Usually it's number two to three. The things that come before that usually are family or religion or, my job or, my day job or whatever it may be. Usually two to three seems to be the sweet spot.
That's interesting. That's super interesting. And it's funny that you said that and you were talking about Kobe Bryant because I was thinking of the example in my head. I was thinking about Kobe Bryant, and you were bringing up all these examples of other things he was doing. And I'm like, yeah, that rings so true. I wish I had told my fighters that at some point. It was great. It's great, fantastic. I'm stealing it from now on. I'm telling you, it's great. It's great. Uh, I'm gonna like veer a bit just from the athletes, just so we go a bit to the general population. I have some clients that have complained to me in the past, and this is something I think you could help with. Let's say they were a bit heavier, and I actually have this personally too. Because I was heavy, I had a big stomach, my stomach was large. When I put on weight, it would come in the beginning in a certain area. Like the first place it kind of plumps in is to like that lower belly and gets to tire. And like a lot of my clients they get like, especially the ones that are a little less understanding of things, like, I just want to get rid of this. I don't get it. I just want to get rid of this. Or if they start trying to bulk or put on a little bit of weight, immediately that part comes back first and they panic, like, I don't want to do this no more. I want to, back in the deficit. I'm freaking out, especially now with a lot of medications. And I train a lot of high end clientele, so they have a lot of access to these things. They're just like, I'll take like a Mujara or so I'm not going to eat. I'm done with this. Like, I don't care. Do you have any tips to combat that? I know that there's spot reduction is not a thing, but do you have any ways to even slow that process down so we're not getting these drastic reactions?
Yeah, I think it depends on because the variance between a general population, a lifestyle client, the variance in attitudes can be wide, right? And so I think it depends on what type of person you're working with. Because I do have some experience in working with non-bodybuilding clients that are still high achieving in other areas. I find that people that are high achieving in other areas, you can usually take that relation and put it towards this process. The process, like, so for example, with that type of client, like I've worked with people that are CEOs or executives, or I've worked even with some like Hollywood stuntmen and stuff like that. And they understand sacrifice. You know,
Yeah.
you've got to, because you can't build muscle staying in the super lean state all the time. You've got to spend some time not being so lean so that you can be leaner in the future. And I'll just usually relate it to like having to sacrifice. And I usually take the approach of choice. hey, we can go the route that you want. Because now this is one thing how I coach all my clients. I take the route of they're going to be also responsible for the path that we're taking. And what I mean by that is a lot of people hire a coach and they want to be like, it's in coach's hands. So then if they don't like something, it's coach's fault. Does that make sense? Where I kind of bring them into the decision making process and I present them with options. And I'll just say, like, hey, I'm not going to try to talk you into anything. You can stay leaner and be forever less muscular and not really get where you're saying you want to go. Or you can sacrifice now, be a little less lean for a while, put on some muscle, and then be leaner in the future. Which one do you want to do? Because then if they choose, I'll just tell them, I think you should be less lean, build some muscle. But then if they choose the other way, they have no right to complain to me when they don't get where they want to go. You know what I mean? Like, I told you this would happen. This was your choice. I'm here to support whatever path you want to take and draw up the plan, but also I'm not a miracle worker. So I can't get you there if you don't go with the path. And I'll do that a lot of times also with just, because I do work with a handful of lifestyle clients every year, like I said, and some of them just want to get into great shape. And I still usually just present the options of choice. And then I also try to lay out cost benefit analysis because I don't think they often think about that. I'll say, like, they'll say, I want to get here, but then their actions don't line up with wanting to get there, right? And I'll say, getting here requires this, this, and this. I make them accept responsibility. Are you willing to do that? And if they say yes, then if they start showing me signs that they're not willing to do that, I just call back to it. Hey, you said you were willing to do this. Like, I'm expecting you to hold up your word, hold up your end of the bargain in this process. And I frequently tell them, like, I'm here to guide you, but I can't want this more than you. And I find that with lifestyle clients, I think that a lot of coaches sometimes get frustrated with themselves because lifestyle clients definitely have a higher rate of dropping off than like athletes. And I think sometimes some coaches beat themselves up for the drop offs, but you can't, as bad as it sounds, it's almost like an addict. You can't force somebody to engage in this process until they're actually ready for it. The
Yeah.
only thing you can do is lay out a reasonable path, try to get them to accept responsibility for taking that path, and then continue to guide them along that path.
I think also lifestyle clients also are so much more influenced by social media than the common athlete that has a little more experience. That's one thing I get a lot. Like, so I'll have one of my lifestyle clients will come in and we'll be doing basically a hypertrophy program, more or less. We'll add some extra boxing and stuff like that for entertainment purposes and a little bit of cardio, but the overall goal is what they want is aesthetics. The other stuff is for kind of fun. And then they'll send me a video of like a CrossFit athlete or a High Rocks athlete. Like, look, he's lean. Look at all his videos. He's been lean all year round. And I'm like, well, it's hard to explain to them that, like, yeah, look, this guy, one, we don't know, you don't know much about anything about him. Like, he might genetically be predispositioned for this to be lean all year round. He might be on certain pharmacological supplements that we have no idea what they are and what he's taking. His diet also might be pristine, and he's built this over the muscle he's built over 20 years, and he's 5'9", 175 pounds. He's not like as big as in your head you think he is, but he looks chiseled to the bone. Not that he's not an amazing athlete and awesome, somebody to look up to, definitely. But and it's harder to, I think it's harder to like get that grasp around reality. And I think the reason why it's so hard is because the feedback loop is so slow with when you're getting the results.
So actually, in those situations, because I get that a lot with bodybuilders too, because in bodybuilding, you're not going to add muscle. I mean, most people aren't going to add muscle if they're staying too lean all the time, and so they want to stay lean, and then they'll send me pictures of somebody that's posting pictures in their off season and they're super lean, and I'll lay out I'll say one of a few things is happening here, like you said. They are genetically elite,
Right.
and I'll just be honest with them. I'll say they are genetically elite in this department. Unfortunately, you are not. And then I'll say, or they are on a certain amount of PEDs, performance enhancing drugs to accomplish this. If my client's natural,
Yeah.
I'll say, you're not using those things. the
Yeah.
other one, because, and then I'll say also, because I do work with some fitness models where it's usually their sponsorships and their modeling are their full-time job.
Yeah.
And one thing that I get to where they have to stay relatively lean all the time, because you can get called on a job like that, you have to be able to show the
Yeah.
abs within a couple of weeks' time. And as much as a lot of fitness models view this like any other job, there are sacrifices they need to make, and a lot of times the sacrifices are you're hungry all the time, you're tired all the time, you have low libido all the time. And so I kind of just say, like, I let them know, I've worked with fitness athletes. This is the state they're always in. They've just accepted it as part of their life to pay the bills. And so I kind of just say, like, you have a couple of options. One, you're not genetically elite. So you either have to be willing to use the performance enhancing drugs and not be natural anymore, or you have to accept that you're going to feel like crap all the time, but you're not paying the bills like they are with it. So what do you want to do? So once again, I just lay out the choice. Once again, I so that way, once again, if they decide to try to stay lean all the time, some of them take me up on it, and then they feel hungry and tired all the time, and then I look like a fortune teller because I predicted the future. Then they feel
That's
hungry and
actually
tired
right.
all the time. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think another thing I think is with the actually you brought up a good point is like I've had clients are like, you know what, I want to get on testosterone. And I'm like, listen, you should go speak with a doctor about this. Like this is my field of expertise. There's plenty, and nowadays it's very easy to do. If you want to do it, I know some good doctors I would recommend to speak to. And I'm like, but it's not a miracle. Like, especially if they're going to be giving you some kind of testosterone replacement therapy dose, you're not going to be putting this in and now you could just live the same lifestyle and you're going to have a six pack all the time. It's not going to happen. And they almost don't believe me and they'll get on it and then they'll be so disappointed when the results aren't like immediate and they're like, I'm still not super lean. I'm like, yeah, you're still not dieting. Like nothing's changed. Like you're getting bigger. Like, look, you were lifting 50-pound dumbbells. Now you're lifting 85-pound dumbbells. Like you're strong, but yeah, you still got to diet. The principles all lay. Like the pharmacology can help a lot. And if we start adding more compounds and you start taking more risks with your health, we could get more and better, but you still have to do the same work. There's no way to skip it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing too. So I work for those that don't know bodybuilding. There's two different sides. There's one like a drug tested side where you have to be natural and you will get drug tested, and then there's an untested side where it's just kind of anything goes. And the only rule I make for my clients is you just got to stick with your divisions. Just don't cheat. And yeah, I think that's one thing too. Is I always kind of lay out what the health risks are for some of my clients too, because like they get this idea that it's just going to be all fun and games and you just take this and it's a magic pill. But it pushes things forward. But the other thing too is if you're not genetically predisposed to a great physique, it will push things forward. But you're not just going to take a drug and you're going to look like one of the top bodybuilders in the world. Genetics, people hate hearing this. Genetics matter more than drugs. I have actually had natural clients that are genetically elite go into an untested event with hundreds of competitors that have been training for decades using all kinds of performance enhancing drugs, and the natural client wins because they
That's
are
amazing.
they are so genetically elite. Genetics matter more than drugs, and then drugs will come after that. And it's like sometimes people don't want to hear that. Like, so if you are not genetically elite and then you start using drugs, you're going to just look like a better version of yourself, but you're not going to transform into these people that look, you know, a lot of times the people that are very big on social media, a lot of times they have this combination of great genetics combined with little, some drug use in there. So it's like
Yeah.
you're not going to just transform into one of those people. You're going to just be an enhanced version of yourself.
I think it's like people think that you'll somehow be able to get over doing all the hard things you have to do anyway. Like you still are going to have to be in that deficit. You're still going to have to cut down to get lean. If you're going to add muscle, you're still going to have to eat in the surplus. You're still going to have to get your protein in. You're still going to have to do all the same basic things. It just when you do them, they work a bit better, a little bit faster. Am I wrong about this, or you think
No,
I'm on?
you're absolutely right. It's still a long process. And then the other thing people don't understand about the performance enhancing drugs is you gain a lot from, the first, year or two you're using them. But then just like with lifting, right? The first couple of years you train, you gain a ton of muscle and then it just gets slower and slower and slower thereafter. So with same thing with using like testosterone, you're gonna you're going to see big gains right out of the gate, and it's just going to get slower and slower and slower. And so you're either going to have to just accept that it's going to be a slow, long process, or you're just going to have to keep taking more and more and more. Like you said, compromise your health more and more. And really, if you are not paying the bills with this process, I usually advise people against it. You know what I mean? Like if you're paying the bills with this process, then yeah, maybe it's it's like a job hazard.
Yeah.
My brother's a nuclear pharmacist, and he works with radioactive materials, and he even had to sign a thing when he got into his field, like it's going to increase his risk of cancer because he's coming in contact with radioactive materials. It's a job hazard. He's accepted that risk. Same thing with some of these guys that make their money off of bodybuilding. It's like it's a job risk. They understand that. Joe Schmo trying to get a six pack, it's not worth it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I don't see, a lot of times I don't see the upside. But, another thing I want to bring up to you actually, it's kind of interesting things around the talking about like nowadays with testosterone. I'm curious what your thoughts are when people are using things like semaglutide, tirzepatide, and these kind of GLP-1 agonists. I'm not speaking about people who are obese or over fat or just people who want to get lean. They want to they're using this to kind of hack through their appetite to lose the weight. I want to give you a quick story of one of my clients. One of my clients had an MRI, a very expensive MRI. So we tested it before he did it, and then we got super lean, and he went under like 10% body fat. At 10%, he was like, I want to go leaner. And I'm like, okay, it was going to be hard. And then he obviously, the cravings, the hunger started getting crazy. Once we got to about 9%, 8%, he really started, but he didn't want to stop. And against my recommendation, he jumped on Mounjaro, tirzepatide. After taking that tirzepatide, he got down all the way to like 7% body fat, according to this MRI. But what was funny, even though he was extremely lean, we saw that he lost like 15% of his lean body mass over the time that from when we had started to the end. And especially from the time, a big chunk of that was from when he started that. Do you see, I don't know if you have any clients that use that or if you could speak on that at all. Do you see that as an issue with accelerating muscle loss using that, or do you think it's just a diet issue?
I've had some clients use it. Uh, I'm not, once again, not at my recommendation, but I know some that have used it. Um, and the thing that I'm seeing, well, first off, like you said, I think those types of drugs are really good for people that are just have been obese and just cannot seem to get it, because it's kind of like in a situation where, like I said, if you're just, somebody trying to put on a little bit of muscle, I usually wouldn't recommend going on testosterone. But if your testosterone is low, then go on
Yeah,
testosterone. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna, there are some risks to it, but overall, you're probably gonna feel better. And in a lot of cases, a lot of the other blood work improves too when you get your testosterone to a normal range. So I would kind of view that as the same thing as like with semaglutide or something like that. Um, you know, if you're obese, it kind of puts your health markers are going to improve in various other ranges. But I see it often where people take it, and I'm less familiar with the muscle loss aspect, but I do know it seems like after a certain amount of time I'm seeing people, it's not after a certain amount of time it seems like it's not doing what they hope it continues to do. And then when they come off, there's like this bad rebound effect where they like harder to control their cravings than it ever was, and harder to control their actions than it ever was. I would say, I have no problem saying this, but I would say this is one of those things where I'm still kind of observing. I'm still kind of like forming my opinions on it. I know everybody right now is like really quick to say they have strong opinions, it's good or it's bad. But I would say, in my situation, I'm still trying to observe the pros and cons of it. But right now, I'm skeptical. I'll say that. I'll say that because I sometimes feel like the cons maybe outweigh the pros, and I feel like people that are of a normal body weight and have the ability to physiologically get where they're trying to go, I think they're just trying to shortcut it. Usually, my experience tells me usually trying to shortcut to get to a place you could get anyway is not a good call, because if you could get there anyway, I think it's better to just develop the mental and logistical skills to be able to get yourself there, if that makes sense.
100% agree with you. I find it almost like a miracle drug for people that struggle with obesity. A lot of people in my family have, and I know what I've dealt with it myself. And even though I've come out of it, I do consider myself a bit lucky that I had this external drive of trying to be a fighter, which was much more powerful than my need to continue eating. But I know a
Hmm.
lot of people that don't have that, and I know the struggle and I know it's real. And I sympathize and empathize with those people massively. And I think it's amazing that there's something out there that can help them. I think somebody that is of a normal body weight that is trying to just get extremely lean, I just don't know if the upside is worth it at this point.
Yeah, you mentioned something too, but like you mentioned earlier about like influence with social media, and I don't mean to go off on like a side tangent here, but I think that social media's influence on people has been really bad. Like I think it's normal human behavior to compare yourself, right? Some people say don't compare yourself to others, but in reality, it's impossible to not compare yourself to others. You know what I mean? Like we are, everybody ranges themselves in this like hierarchy, but before social media, you compare yourself to your coworkers and you compare yourself to, your friends and just people in your small
Out down the
social circle.
street. Yeah.
Yeah, but now you have an endless supply of people to compare yourself to. And you know who gets bumped up to the stuff that you're gonna find on social media? You're gonna find the people that's gonna be pushed because of the algorithm to you are the most successful, the most jacked, the most ripped, the richest, you know what I mean? And so the most attractive. And so then it's I find it's harder for people to like just accept who they are, you know? And I don't say that with like, because I'm somebody that I think everybody should be striving towards self improvement in some way. But I think you also need to accept what your range is. Do you know what I mean? Like, I guess for myself, and because then if you don't accept it, and this is sorry to go off on a rant here, but I think this is important. I try to instill this in my clients because, when I started bodybuilding, everybody who decides they want to be a bodybuilder, they want to be a great bodybuilder.
Yeah.
When I first started, I thought, and I'm sure you were this way with fighting. I thought I want to go as far as I can. I want to be a great pro. You know what I mean? I want to
Yeah.
be one of the best in the world. But then at a certain point, you have to accept reality. I mean, I've got these tiny wrists and I don't have this big bodybuilder frame. And I did get to be a pro on the natural bodybuilding side, but I'm not I was never a great pro, and I have to accept that. But then it allowed me to search for the things that I actually am really good at. I did get to be a pro, so that's more than most people are ever able to get. And then also, I found that I have the skill to coach other people. And so it's like, I think that sometimes people get so caught up in I'm not this, or I'm not that, or I'm not what this other person is, they are completely missing looking for the things they are really good at. Just improve in these areas. I accepted I wasn't going to be this like world champion bodybuilder, but I was still going to give it my all and have fun going as far as I possibly can. And I think that I always tell some of my competitors, I think the most dangerous person you can encounter when you're a competitor is somebody that has no guarantees they're going to go far, but does it anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's a dangerous
100%.
person. Like they've got nothing to lose. They're just going for it.
Yeah, they're giving everything they got, and they're not going to let any mental block that comes through stop them because they already know this probably has a limit. I'm just doing my best to break through whatever I can.
Yeah, yeah. And for myself as a competitor, I beat a lot of people that I had no business beating genetically. But it was one of those things where because I had kind of accepted I knew I wasn't going to go far. Do you know what I mean? I knew I wasn't, but then I'm kind of playing with nothing to lose. It's like I'm not going to go far, but I want to see how far I can go. And so it leads to this like incredible amount of resilience because I don't get discouraged by anything. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm here.
yeah, I mean, a bad placing, whatever. Let's just keep going, keep moving forward because if you don't have that expectation, I don't have to get down about anything because I didn't have the expectation to be world champion. Hey, failure, let's just keep going.
100%. I know that because obviously coming from my background, I remember when I went to start training, I went to Chicago and I went to like a bunch of different gyms. And I was like, hey, I want to be a UFC fighter. And like, listen, we'll put you in the amateur class. I'm sure you'll be good. I'm sure over time, yeah, whatever. Here, pay the membership fee. I went to every gym and I was like, man, I didn't even have money to pay the membership fee. And I went to one of the gyms. I met this guy, Dino Spencer, and he's like, I'm like, listen, I want to be in the OC. He's like, great, I'll see you at practice at 4 o'clock. And I was like, oh man, this guy lets me do it. I'm like, I don't have any money to pay. He's like, can you do it? Yes, I clean toilets and stuff like that. He's like, all right, that's your job. And I went and I started working, and because I came from that place of like almost everyone in the town that I started fighting and thought there's this kid has zero chance. I almost like every win just was like shot me up 1,000 feet in the air because it was like no one thinks I'm gonna do this anyway. Like no one expects me to win this anyway, and I'm every time I'm winning, I'm this underdog story.
Yeah, yeah. And I find that this is applicable to lifestyle as well as athletes, is that like there's a saying, I couldn't find who said it originally, so I can't credit whoever said it originally. I've looked. But most people overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years. And
Yeah.
man, that is true. That is absolutely true because like I mean most people they don't stick with anything. And I even see this in coaching. I'm sure you've seen this in training. I've been coaching for 15, 16 years now. And I get some of these coaches and they get upset that they haven't built their career in like 2 years. And I'm like, you're like a baby in this sport, like
Yeah.
you have to sacrifice and make it work for years, a decade. Talk to me when you're 10 years in, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's when things really like you're really in it. And so I think that the problem also is, attention spans are difficult. And I think when we're coaching people, oftentimes our job is just to put things in perspective, timelines, hey, you're not behind where you should be. You're on track. You need to keep with it. And kind of like reassure them that they're not behind where they should be so that they don't get distracted and veer off course. Cause man, that's so easy for people these days.
Oh, jeez. I think it's always been easy. It's just easier now.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm gonna end it with one more because I don't want to keep you. Plus, it's over here where I'm at. It's like 1 in the morning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we got work tomorrow, like 6 a.m. But uh, I was gonna ask. This is actually a personal question I wanted to ask for my own personal journey. So I've decided recently to take my fitness a little more seriously. I mean, I always train. I always keep in. Quite recently, I did a diet as a bet. My client bet me that I couldn't get down to single digit body fat in a certain amount of time, very short period of time,
Hmm.
just for fun. And he bet me a good chunk of money that I wouldn't be able to do it. And I felt like, okay, it felt like a challenge, it felt fun. And I got lean. I didn't do a DEXA scan. We did a bunch of different other measurements. We did with the pinchers. We did some. What was the other one we did? Ultrasound. I remember. We did another one. We did two, but all of them came like 9, 8, 10 in that area, right? So I was quite lean. And I was like, man, awesome. I'm super lean. I'm gonna now build my way back up. Like I had abs all the way through. Actually, it was one of the first times that I had a little the excess skin from my lower stomach, but it was my abs had gotten so much bigger over time that it kind of pushed out, so it didn't look so bad. I was really happy with that, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna build up slowly. I'm not gonna gain too much weight. But life kicked in, whatever. I gained. I didn't get. I never got. I'm always in shape, but I probably got to like 20%, 22% body fat in that range, and I really
Hmm.
didn't want and over the past now over there's been like 6 months, 7 months, maybe 8 months since then. And I really was like, oh, I'm gonna try to. I want to see how big I can get, how much muscle I can gain. I'm like 38. I want to get bigger. But I was wondering, do you think what's your stance on this? Do you think it's better to drop down in body weight to like maybe 15% body fat and then bulk up, or is bulking from here just as effective? I know it's kind of like with the P ratio, it's kind of debated. Well, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is surplus, and especially it doesn't take as much surplus as people think to build muscle. And so the way I look at it is you need to be in a surplus and you need to be in a surplus for a long period of time because, anytime you're not in a surplus, you're not building. That definitely shows, and my experience also shows, is like if you're not gaining weight, you're not building muscle. And when they put advanced If when they put, let's set aside new trainees, let's set aside people that took time off and are coming back to it. Let's set aside people that were injured and they're coming back to it. If you're an advanced trainee, you've been at it for, several plus years. If you're not gaining weight while you're lifting hard, you're not building muscle. You're just maintaining. And so with that in mind, you need to find your range of what I call for my clients is you need to find your range of operation. And what I view as my range of operation is we talked about how when people get too lean, they get all these side effects, right? Hunger, fatigue, low libido, which is coming from low testosterone. So I try to find how lean can I get somebody where they don't have these symptoms.
Yeah.
I view that as the bottom range of my range of operation, my bottom number. And then I find what is, what is the top end of their weight where they still feel good. They may not be thrilled with the way that they look, but they're comfortable, right? They don't have like joint pain. They're strong. We see no negative side effects from being too heavy. And then I just have them operating here. Just using myself as an example, I'm not a real big guy, but I can get down to about 187 before I start to feel those side effects.
Yeah.
Um, and then I get to 205
Hello, I'm here.
and been messing it up.
No, I'll edit it. Don't worry about it.
Okay, sorry about that. My daughter
It's
was giving me a
actually
call.
no worries. I'm not seeing you on the screen though.
Let me come back here.
I'm s-
Okay,
we're back. We're back now.
there we go. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of reiterate the last thing I said so that we can still get that there. Okay, sorry, everything's falling off here. Okay, so I view that as like, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, yeah, perfect, perfect.
Okay, so I view that as like my range of operation. So for me, I have this range of operation and I can comfortably get down to, 187, 188, and I can 205 is where once I get above 205, I start to have like, joint issues and I get a little winded when I train with higher reps and things like that. So for me, I don't like to go below the 187 mark and I don't like to go above the 205, 206 mark. So I operate in there. I will diet down to my lowest end at about 187 or so, and then I slowly gain up. It takes a lot of discipline to slowly gain up. I'll tell you that because sometimes you get in this mindset where you're like, it's time to gain. And I mean, I try not to even put on a pound a week, because I mean, I'm working with, less than 20 pounds where I can gain up. So, let's just say even if I gain 20 pounds, even if I gain a pound a week, and I only get, 20 weeks out of it, that's still not a ton of surplus time before I have to diet down again.
Yeah,
So for myself, if I gain 0.2 pounds in a week, good. Let's just keep it going. If I gain zero point 0.4, okay, let's keep it going. If I gain a full pound, I'm slowing it down. I'm going to reduce my calories. I want to gain slowly. I try to sometimes have people and myself, I want to stay a whole year in a surplus. Like if I can stretch out gaining 20 pounds over the course of an entire year, I'm going to do that. So now I have an entire year of growing. Then we'll mini cut. We try to lose the 20 pounds as quickly as we can during a mini cut. It's different from a prep, but lose the 20 pounds quickly, right back to it. Let's grow again. And also it takes some discipline, but you'll find that like if you found a good range of operation, um, it shouldn't feel too stressful to stay in a surplus. You know what I mean? Like you should be able to comfortably do it.
that's awesome. Super helpful. Cliff, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate the time, and I would love to have you on again. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and
No, man, I appreciate it. Thank you again for having me on. Thank you.
definitely, maybe we could do one, me, you, and Steve together. It'd be fun.
That'd be fantastic. Let me know.
All right, brother. We'll talk soon.
Awesome. Have a good one.